Okay, good morning, everyone, and welcome to the forum. It's good to see a lot of familiar faces and a couple of new ones too. I am Jeff Peckrell. I'm the coordinator for the forum. I'm also one of three co-chairs of the Human Rights Working Group, along with Dolores Heilbrunn, who is here somewhere, and Melvin Starks. And we collectively and some other key players help us find these programs to enlighten you about things that are not getting covered adequately in the media, right? So we need to hear about things like the Poor People's Campaign, which you'll be learning about shortly here. Before we get into that, I just want to talk about some other announcements, some other things that are happening. A week from today, we will have a member of the church, Wayne Shung, will be speaking about animal rights and its connection to the MAGA movement. So that's an angle you probably haven't heard about very much before. 2 weeks from today, we don't have anything scheduled. And 3 weeks from today, on the 23rd of February, we have a gentleman named Dorsey Nunn, who will be speaking about the civil rights of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. So that presentation and today are part of a theme we're trying to do for Black History Month, which it is Welcome to Black History Month. And other announcements, let's see. After church today, in this room, there will be a very important meeting. It's a congregational vote on two resolutions, and one of them is sponsored by our committee, and it's called the Apartheid-Free Communities Pledge, and it's in solidarity with the Palestinian people, essentially. And we hope that you all will return for that. I think there might be some light lunch for that. I'm not sure about that, but we really do hope everybody will come back for that and vote for it. Okay, what other announcements? I think that's mainly it. And we can do the Ohlone land recognition. Bree, would you mind doing that?
We, the members of the First Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco, acknowledge that our community is located on the ancestral homeland of the Ohlone peoples, who inhabited what is now the San Francisco Peninsula. Anthropologists say that these indigenous communities lived in and moved through this area for over 10,000 years. As the original stewards of this land, the Ohlone and other indigenous peoples understood the interconnectedness of all things and maintained harmony with all of nature for millennia. We honor them now in their enduring commitment to our Mother Earth.
Okay, I just have one more announcement before I introduce our speaker, which is about how we do Q&A. So you'll notice some cards on the tables and the chairs, and if you have questions for Nell as she's speaking, please jot them down, and then we'll probably go to Q&A around a quarter after, 20 after, and we'll ask the questions from the microphone here so that everybody who's on Zoom can also hear the questions. And that's how we do our Q&A. I also want to mention that we do encourage anybody who has differing views on the information presented, don't hesitate to put those into your questions. We had some comments last week about how we need to encourage more opposing views in the forum, and that's how we do it. However, the format of this meeting is not either a debate or a kind of a discussion group. We have another kind of meeting that the Human Rights Working Group does for that. We call it Global Conversations. And if you have ideas for something like that, please bring them to us and we might be able to schedule that. Okay. All right. So I want to introduce Nell Myhand. She is an Oakland-based organizer and a member of the Bay Area Poor People's Campaign Steering Committee. And she serves as co-chair of the California Poor People's Campaign, working locally and nationally to amplify the voices of low and no wealth people in our demands for resources to meet our basic needs for housing, education, healthcare, and a livable climate. So I'd like to now welcome you to the podium, Nell.
Thank you so much, Jeff, and Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco. I'm Nell Myhand, and I'm here with Reverend Monica Cross, and we're co-sharing this presentation. California Poor People's Campaign got invited.
Thank you.
And we're here.
Yeah. Yeah, glad to be here. I think I was here a long time ago out in the seminary, came for a visit. I enjoyed myself, so I'm glad to be back. Glad seeing good folks doing justice work. Thank you.
So I'm actually going to start one of the strategies of the civil rights movement, past and present and future, is theomusicology. And so I'm moved to sing just this version of the song that was written actually on the National Mall in Washington, D.C. during the 68 Poor People's Campaign. And it goes, everybody's got a right to live. Everybody's got a right to live. We want poverty no more. We want justice for the poor. 'Cause everybody's got a right to live. So thank you for indulging me in that song. Says a lot about why we're here. So the name of this talk is called The Long and Bitter but Beautiful Struggle for a New World. And that's a quote from Dr. King's prophetic Beyond Vietnam, A Time to Break Silence speech that we're going to be hearing some more about. Dr. King told us we are caught in an inescapable network of mutuality, tied in a single garment of destiny. Whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. And he's pictured here with Thich Nhat Hanh, who was a spiritual advisor to him. A very important person in our lives, even now. But that relationship is one that I became aware of in my work with the California Poor People's Campaign. And so this talk is going to situate the California Poor People's Campaign, the 68 and the current campaign, in relationship to white Christian nationalism, which is a topic that is on a lot of people's minds right now. So we're going to take a look at how those things fit together. And I'm going to start actually with my own story. It's Black History Month. I'm a Black person. It is important in the work that we do that people embrace the work through the lens of how they are themselves impacted, right? The work that we do is for the benefit of all, including us, starting with us. And so I start with my family, because when I talk about the civil rights movement and white Christian nationalism, I can, on each one of these pictures, I could tell you some story about those two things and the relationship between Black history, the civil rights movement, and the impact of white Christian nationalism on my family currently, in recent history, and going back a long way. So we don't come here alone. None of us come here alone. We're all connected to each other. So beginning with my own experience, I want to say that one of the things that I've become really clear about is that the impact of Christian dominance, this idea that there is only one way to be in the world that's okay, which is to be Christian, that I've had these experiences of being rejected because I wasn't the right kind of Christian, or because I wasn't claiming my Christian faith. I have been told that things that I did with my body were not good, right? Through the lens of Christianity. I've heard heaven described and good described as light or white, and hell and evil described as dark or black, right? So the things that we struggle against, they come to us through the culture, through the systems, through the institutions. And so I want to invite all of us here, as we're going through this information, to give some thought to what your experiences have been, how it impacts you, and then what we're going to do to get together to change it. Some of the levels on which Christian dominance operates. I don't know how many people here used war bonds to pay for their college educations, right? My family had war bonds. We bought, that was a regular savings plan in my family. And so it was as an adult that I realized, oh, they were asking us to fund, right, the violence that they were committing across the world through selling these war bonds. So there is the existence of this force called Christianity, dominant Christianity. It's not about people's individual relationships. It's about how state power and the church come together to impose its will on people at whatever cost. So we can see it in our domestic and foreign policy, the Christian nationalism that we care a lot to understand and dismantle is reflected in the lack of health care. It's reflected in the attacks on trans folks. It's reflected in the incarceration rates that are disproportionately incarcerating Black and brown people. It is reflected in what we have come to accept will be an endless war against terror. And there's a report that the Kairos Center and Move On commissioned about white Christian nationalism, and you'll hear some more about their definition and strategies and recommendations about what to do. But this is part of their definition, that it is a mythology of American exceptionalism that was ordained by God. The interpretation is that real Americans are only the descendants of white Europeans. There's a veneration for a traditional family structure. It's enforced, it's policed, who we love, how we love. White Christian nationalism wants to decide that for all of us. The perpetuation of various economic systems that maintain and reinforce economic dominance for a subset of white Christians. And I'm going to explain a little bit on this slide. On the left side of the slide is the map of the state of Alabama. My father's people were enslaved in Alabama, Opelika, Alabama, Auburn, in that area. And the slave schedule, if you haven't ever seen a slave schedule in the 1860 census and all the ones prior to that, Black people who were enslaved were counted as chattel. And so you can't see the detail necessarily, but it asks the slave owner's name, and then the slaves are identified by age, by gender, by color, as if they were an inventory of furniture and other property. So that system that my folks inherited set up what a pernicious, exclusion to education. And that continues to impact Black people through my lineage, Black people in my community. And, we have concerns that, and not only Black people, because now we know that the whole education system itself, the very concept of free public education is under attack for all of us. And so I just wanted to stop and say that the roots are deep. The challenge that we face is complex. It's longstanding. And that we're here today is evidence that people can come together, they can push back, they can protect, they can defend, and then they can build, the society. That I can stand in front of you as a Black person speaking to a mostly white audience is because people are organized. Okay, it's not magic. It's like people come together, they figure it out, they sort it out, they make commitments, and then, we build a society that we want to have, that beautiful, the new world that the long and bitter but beautiful struggle is for. So the erasure of the separation of church and state, big agenda for the white Christian nationalists, right? They want a theocratic society. They want to be able to say that their God said, and then things happen. The treasury gets spent certain ways. The policies reflect that. The practices reflect that as well. White Christian nationalism justifies the use of violence to protect and defend the nation from dangerous others. And I want to just say, I watched Norman Solomon's presentation last week. And one of the things he said that caught my attention was he said about the Ukraine and Russia, that the US position has been, let's you and them fight, right? Not let us fight, let's you and them fight. And so then we have what, is ghastly war that is taking so much energy and lives, so many lives, right? And that was before the genocide in Palestine was launched. And so these are some of our political leaders in the Congress currently serving who claim Christian nationalism as their orientation. And so Mike Johnson, Speaker of the House, he was quoted as saying, the return of Jewish people to their land of Israel is part of the fulfillment of prophecy, even if it means that 2/3 of the Jews will be slaughtered during these tribulations. In the center, so when they say they stand with Israel, people should investigate what they mean. In the center is Representative Marjorie Taylor Greene, who tried to censure Representative Rashida Tlaib of Michigan, who's the only Palestinian American in Congress, for her participation in a pro-Palestine protest. And she's standing in front of a podium that says free speech matters, right? Okay, so like I said, when they say things, we have to investigate. What do those words mean? We attribute our thoughts and understanding, but we really have to look into it. And so then on the other side is Senator Lindsey Graham, who said, we're in a religious war. Do whatever the hell you have to defend yourself. Level the place. That's the consideration that's being given to our Palestinian siblings by our Congress. So it helps to explain how we end up with a budget that allocates 69% of the discretionary budget to the military. So that regardless of who sits in the White House, this is the budget for the country. And the budget is a reflection of the values. That budget has led us to a country where poverty is the 4th leading cause of death in the US. And we know that poverty is policy violence. We believe that militarism is immoral. Over $1 trillion a year is being spent on endless wars, mass incarceration, policing and immigration, and border enforcement. And none of it makes us safer. So we have demands. The demands are built on the demands from the '68 campaign. So I'm sharing just this demand. A full set of demands can be found in our Jubilee platform, Jubilee policy platform, which just lays it out. In April 4th, 1967, when Dr. King took to the pulpit to deliver his Beyond Vietnam speech, there were more than 250 years of chattel slavery and 100+ years of Jim Crow was the wind beneath his wings to stand and really call out the United States. He shined the light on the ongoing cost of the US government's attachment to the death culture and named some of the costs at home and abroad. He said, a nation that continues year after year to spend more money on military defense than on programs of social uplift is approaching spiritual death. And later that year, he called for the Poor People's Campaign. He was in consultation with folks throughout the country, especially high concentrations of poor Black people were in the South, but the '68 Poor People's Campaign was important because his vision was that it was not only Black people who were suffering from the poverty, that the whole country was suffering from poverty, and that Black people disproportionately, but also brown people disproportionately. But the raw numbers of poor people, there are many, many more poor white people than people of color. And so he was like, all poor people can come together. So this behind the picture is a letter that he was writing to say, I'm calling for this poor people's campaign. And so this is some of it's hard to see here, and the technology at the time, people probably remember the technology of the time, typewriters, and we didn't even have fax machines at that point, mimeograph and those kinds of things. And so they fade with time, but this shows some of the activity, the organizing, the activity that the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, led by Dr. King at that time, engaged in preparation for this massive Poor People's March on Washington, D.C. And so the notes from some of the meetings and the brochure, the agenda for who they were going to meet with, which secretaries of which departments, on which days they were going to put their demands in front of when they got to Washington, D.C. And like that, there was a tremendous outpouring of time, energy, and resource to bring into being a cooperation among poor people across every line of difference that had been turned into division. The differences are not the problem. When the differences are the power and the beauty. But when they get turned into divisions and we get pitted against each other, that's our work to say no to that. 1 year to the day from beyond Vietnam. On April 12th, Coretta Scott King took to the podium. She said amazing things that day. So this is just an excerpt. Picking up 8 days later, we will be marching toward Washington soon. On Thursday, May 2nd, we will return to Memphis to begin where my husband was slain and kick off his Poor People's Campaign. We will be marching toward Washington to demand that America share its abundant life with all of its citizens. And march they did. This is some of the literature that came out to highlight the participation of other groups besides Black people, because that's part of how racism works, is it says poverty is a Black problem, and then people say, well, that's Black people's problem, not ours. And so this was Peggy Terry, a poor white person from Appalachia, Mel Tom with the National Indian Youth Council, and then in the center, the gentleman is not named, but this was part of the statement from the position paper that Puerto Ricans wrote. Change in America's approach to poverty can only be accomplished from a position of organized strength. That strength can only spring from an organized coalition of poor people that cuts across ethnic, racial, and geographical lines. This is where we stand as Puerto Ricans. This is where we stand as poor persons and as part of the Poor People's Campaign. This document pictured here was written by Ralph David Abernathy, who became the leader of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference and continued the organizing work that led to the establishment of Resurrection City on the National Mall in May of 1968. And they were there for 6 weeks. It rained like 5 weeks out of 6, but they were determined. They made provisions for people to be there. They had mule trains coming. They had people who walked there. People from San Francisco took buses. There were people from all over the country who gathered on the National Mall and took part in that very important watershed event, really, for this country. And that Certainly, we didn't accomplish all of the things that we had hoped to accomplish and still need to accomplish. But many of the things that we're fighting now to protect and some things that have been rolled back came out of that effort. The campaign pushed Congress and federal agencies to allocate millions for programs including Head Start and education and welfare services for the Bureau of Indian Affairs. It helped to catalyze the desegregation of schools and extension of labor programs. And significantly, the campaign introduced new strategies for protest and social change. The movement also helped transform national discussions on race, class, economic opportunities, security, and democracy. So in 2018, again, in consultation with lots of supporters, many denominations of faith leaders, denominations of Christian faith leaders, but also many different faith leaders from other expressions of spirituality, labor unions, NGOs, lots of individuals, lots of different folks came together to launch the Poor People's Campaign, a national call for moral revival. And on Mother's Day in 2018, it was launched. So the Poor People's Campaign, the 2018 campaign, was established with two primary goals: to amplify the voices of those who are most impacted by what we call interlocking injustices. Dr. King had already identified poverty, racism, and militarism as key issues that had to be addressed in order for this country to live up to its own words about what could be. And then, for obvious reasons, we added ecological devastation. And then we added the distorted moral narrative of white Christian nationalism because there is a myth that there's not enough. And that if anybody is poor in this great country, it's because they're not working hard enough. It's because they're not really smart. It's because they're not faithful, right? And so we're taking that on. The second goal was to build power to change policy, because we know that if the Congress can, in 2025, say that $7.25 an hour is an adequate minimum wage, that we can start right there with policy change that could lift people out of poverty, relieve the burden that it puts on people who don't have the capacity to meet even their most basic needs for housing and food. And so we have a set of fundamental principles that guide our work. We have a covenant of nonviolence, because in the radical legacy, we are picking up nonviolent direct action as our key strategy. We are not trying to become what we deplore, okay? We're not trying to do that. So we're using our moral will and our soul force to call for a moral agenda based on fundamental human rights. And pretty simple: establish justice and end systemic racism, promote the general welfare, ensure domestic tranquility, secure the blessings of liberty, and provide for the common defense. It's all we're asking. It's constitutional. It shouldn't be controversial, right? So we're acting like it's not. And so at this point, I want to invite Reverend Monica Cross to come pick it up from here. Thank you. And then we'll have Q&A after Reverend Monica finishes.
Thank you, Nell. Great presentation. So I'm Reverend Monica Cross. I come to you as a veteran. Was in the Navy for 22 years. I grew up in South Central Los Angeles, about a stone's throw from Watts. And the only way many of us felt we could get out of that situation was going to the military. So not only do those in power oppress you, they provide the structures by which you can be depressed. They make it so that you see nothing else but what they provide. And so, particularly as a transgender person, particularly these days, there's a recognition that there's a call to action. Things don't change unless we stand up to make them change. Now, part of my experience was being in those conservative areas in a very different world where they don't care about LGBTQ folks. They don't care about folks in poverty. It's all your fault because you didn't do what we told you to do. And that's a matter of faith for them. It's a matter of faith. So when they come after each one of us, they do because that's where their faith calls them to go. I hurt you and I depress you and I take your housing away because it's my faith. It's not just something just like, okay, we're going to do. No, it's a matter. And as you probably know, when you come from a point of faith, there's a definite call. You feel you're righteous by making more people poor and by doing policy violence based on your interpretation of the scriptures. It says, oh, the poor will be with you always. So why do anything? Or, oh, it's wrong to use your body in such a wrong way, in their words, because that's how they interpret biblical scripture. And I'm sure I'm not telling you anything you don't know. However, I had a preacher one day said, teaching is repeating until learning takes place. I have never forgotten that. So the call to action. So I spent time at the Pentagon, and I can't say no more than that. However, you know who's always on Capitol Hill? The corporations. They're always there because they want money. They want blood money so they can kill folks overseas and make money at it with our tax dollars. So the Poor People's Campaign went to D.C., went to the halls of Congress, speaking to different Congress people up there and their staffs. And the thing is, now get this. Now, so we visited, I think at the time, Dianne Feinstein's office. And they're saying, we don't hear from our constituents in California. Why? Because they're too far away. Now, mind you, in a very different world, the conservative folks, the haters, you want to call them, they're always there in their faces stating their case. When they had the hate crimes bill going forward some years ago, you know who was in there? It was Barbara Lee? No, right-wingers, really narrow-minded folks, Christian nationalists, they were in there. They rarely ever got any visits from liberal-minded, justice-oriented people. So when we go to D.C., it's to make the voices heard. And then we have statewide actions also, going up to Sacramento also. And stating our case up in the offices of different folks up there to make sure that the voices of the poor, low-wage, hard-working people are getting heard. And once again, even in that space there in Sacramento, you know what? Those folks who mean us no good, they're in there too. And they got a whole lot of money behind them. So they're already doing their call to action. Where are we at? Are we up there doing our thing? I think I personally, for me, I do this because it's a matter of my body. I only got one body. And when they pass laws against transgender folks and other folks, that means our bodies are on the line. So while those folks who come against us are fighting to maintain their privilege, primarily their white privilege, typically, they want to maintain the structures because they benefit from the structure. So they put our bodies on the line. So being in Sacramento and making our voices heard is critical. There we go. And then we have Bay Area actions also, local actions, which you can be involved in. Everything from the East Bay over in Oakland to over here in San Francisco, in different places around the Bay Area. Now, this is just the Bay Area here, but the state campaign, we have 4 quad chairs, and Nell and I are 2 of the quad chairs. Because our state's so big, we have chairs in LA, Southern California, all the way down to the San Diego and places, and we have in the Bay Area all the way up past Eureka. And what I really enjoy is going into Eureka at different places and letting the word and good news get out. Because, like, hey, wait a minute, you're transgender, right? Yeah. Well, how can you be a minister? So now, mind you, they believe God can do anything until they get to me. Surely God would never call a Black transgender woman in the ministry. That's called Christian nationalism. Won't let people imagine God's grace and God's love. Because even right now, this idea that surely God would not allow diversity, equity, inclusion. No, God, well, don't we want to hear all God's people, the voice of all the people? No, 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 no. Everything about DEI, but that's a whole different sermon. But that there is injury and damage behind these words. And then now recommendations. Organize more holistically. And that's where, for me, radically inclusive hospitality coming in. Doing those things that might make you uncomfortable. Like you see a person who's without housing, or a person who or immigrant. You know, right now, immigration, a real big issue again. You know, immigration has been an issue since the turn of the last century. It's still a problem for a lot of folks, but people still come here. So immigration is ongoing. Contest and invest, stop ceding geographic, political, and moral space. And that is a problem. The only way we can actually make change is by going in those areas that people don't expect us to go. Example, when I was in seminary, we had a choice. You might have heard of immersion, maybe in your experience, where you go get immersed in different places. I could have gone to Mexico. I could have gone to the Gaza Strip. I chose to go to Appalachia. I went to Appalachia as a trans person. There was no Black folks in Appalachia at the time, except for me. A trans person in Appalachia? No. But people say, well, how does that work? We don't get it. Because what happened years ago, the government moved all the Black folks out years ago because they were trying to make sure that land stayed a particular way, if you know what I mean. So for many, I was the first Black person they met. I mean, it's just a fact. So as long as we don't go into those spaces, even here in California, they'll never have a different narrative. And then plan and coordinate for a deeper crisis. That's a whole sermon by itself. Because we're some really interesting times right now. Everything that folks have planned, those in power have planned in right-wing Christian nationalism, it didn't just start yesterday. They've been planning this stuff for at least 50, 60 years. So where we are right now, they worked hard to get us to be where we are. And that means we can't be complacent. There's no room for complacency. We have to be committed to ensure that the work of the Poor People's Campaign and other movements make that change. Because we had $7.25 salary for how long now? That's not going to change unless we are committed and engaged. And then, so all of us organize to counter white Christian nationalism and build a pro-democracy society. First, strategy one, leverage and incorporate material aid for communities to build power. Be in relationship with the communities, be in relationship with those folks without housing, being in relationship with other denominational and churches and faith communities. Strategy two, address human needs for connection, spiritual nourishment, and a sense of belonging. I would suggest that one of the reasons why we're in this situation now is because some folks don't feel like they belong. So we need to address that. And then fully integrate faith community and community leaders into pro-democracy movement. One of the big things, so I'm the faith co-chair, quad chair. And one of the biggest things is getting people of faith and clergy to engage and be part of the movement. And so, but that's what they did. That's what we've always done. You have to have that faith component in there to really move things forward. And I think, is that it? So join us. You go to Facebook, a new PPC, California newsletter. You can go to us on the Instagram, Facebook. Yeah, that's it. Thank you for your time. Oh, I'm sorry. Go ahead, Nell. Okay. Okay, cool. Yeah, Fremont for everyone. The adoption of a camping ordinance is not expected to reduce overall homeless. So you do know that the Supreme Court made the thing that being homeless and without housing is a crime. And so Fremont has got this thing now. So that's one thing we have to stand against. So tell Fremont City Council to vote no on the camping ban Tuesday, February 4th, in person and by email. They have to hear your voice. And of course, SEIU, join us February 12th, in person, local 1000 in Sacramento. Once again, it's talking about labor. Anything else? And then sign on to divest from militarism. Yeah. You know, our money shouldn't be used to kill people all the time. Yeah, we know corporations make a lot of money through blood money, but we've got to stand against that. Thank you. Thank you, Unitarian University of San Francisco. Thank you very much as we continue this struggle. Okay, now we can take questions, I guess.
So we definitely want to thank Nell Myhand and Reverend Monica Cross for their presentation today. You guys did a great job. We appreciate your willingness to take questions. And Nell, you had mentioned the problem of Christian nationalism. Progressives rightfully denounce Christian nationalism, yet progressives overlook so many statements by Jesus on behalf of the poor and on economic justice. Is that oversight a mistake?
Preacher. That's a huge.
Come to the microphone, please.
Sorry. That is a huge mistake. Jesus wasn't crucified and didn't rise because he was about the norms and power. Jesus was crucified because he was a rebel. He was crucified because he did not follow the stuff in Roman society and Jewish society. Anyway, I mean, that's the whole sermon. It's that they did the same thing to Dr. King. They always do that stuff. What they pull out what's going to appeal to those in power, and then they cast everything away. Anyway, let me stop. Ugly, I'm sorry.
Do you have recommendations for trainers who do in-person training of groups of people?
Trainings on, sure, that's what we do. But you're in the right place, because our organizing is built on nonviolent direct action. And so we have a covenant of nonviolence that we read, we investigate, we look at the Kingian steps and principles, because it's quite a commitment in the face of violence to decide that your greatest power is not to strike back. And so we are in an ongoing process, and especially in these times when the threats are much more out there happening, threats being made, and attacks, not just threats, but also attacks. And so the work that we do with the campaign helps us to develop the capacity and the commitment to nonviolence.
Can you please explain? You had mentioned in the presentation that poverty is the fourth leading cause of death. Can you please explain how it's the fourth leading cause of death in the United States?
Sure, and I can share, when I send the slides, I'll share the link to the study that was done by a professor at Riverside. And what he did was he looked at the mortality rates for people across age, and then with filters around income. And I mean, like, if I went back to the picture of my family, I can show you my sister who buried 2 of her children already. Okay. I can show you the gravestone of one of my brothers and the picture of one of my brothers, both of whom my mother had to bury before they turned 21. So those of us who are living in poverty, we go to a lot of funerals. So it wasn't surprising to us. But what he did is what Bishop Barber calls, he had the footnotes of the struggle. And so they investigated what are the causes of death for people in various age groups. And what they found was that the stress, for all the various reasons, that people who are poor die prematurely at greater rates than people who are not poor. It's, I mean, we need this, the footnotes of the struggle, somebody who has studied it, but our lived experience tells us that that's true. We know it because we're living it.
You spoke about the need for social justice-minded people to lobby their reps in DC and Sacramento. What else can we do for those who can't travel to DC and Sacramento?
Correct.
I remember Dr. King addressed this. Everybody can't march and do different things. A lot of us, because of our incomes, can't do it. But you can make phone calls. Phone calls when there's a action going on. You can cook food, bring food out. And we shouldn't let the empire tell us how we should think about such things. What is your faith called you to do? I mean, I never imagined being up here, the transgender person doing this. Just never imagined it. So you have to break out of that box. I know a friend of mine, she has CP, and she preaches. She preaches, she goes out marching, believe it or not, in her wheelchair. And she did a lot of stuff on social media. And she's got this new technology thing where all she had to do is use her eyes, and she can actually write things on social media. Now, the cool thing, which folks don't really get, she also does communion. If you're familiar with communion in a church, she also does that as a person who has cerebral palsy, severe cerebral palsy. So, yeah, she does stuff that's wow. Yeah.
Thank you for that question. The activities in the Bay Area that were on the slide, support of the Wood Street Commons folks, there are so many different things that can be done to support people who are in the struggle. our work of amplifying the voices of those who are most impacted means that we connect with people who are self-organizing. So we're not going to the advocates to ask them what their opinion is of what we should be doing. We're going to the people who are impacted with our offer of the resources that a national campaign has. And so some of the Washington, D.C. things and the things in Sacramento, particularly the things in Sacramento, those happened on days of national action. So there were poor people's campaigns in 40 states outside the state capital. When we're doing those kinds of things, we're always looking for people who can push things on social media, as Reverend Monica said. We do phone banking. We did a lot of GOTV work, which involved registering people to vote, encouraging people to, giving people information about who can vote, that people who have felony convictions can not only be president. Can you hear me now? In California, you can actually vote, right? So talking to people, coming here, reading the newsletter, sharing it. There's, once you decide, then, the path will become much more clear about what kinds of things you can do from wherever you are.
Here's a statistical question. Considering the percentage of officially documented crimes which involve violence of a white person against a non-white person, has there been a trend in this percentage over time? Has that percentage decreased over time, which is what we would hope for? What is the latest percentage on record if you have that information?
Yeah, I'm not the speaker who can offer that to you, but I would encourage you to build relationships with people in your community who have different experiences than you have. And then you'll learn an answer, perhaps not the definitive answer, but there are some answers that are in the room.
We at the Unitarian Universalist Society of San Francisco and other congregations that value social justice are mostly white and probably not many poor people in our membership. Are there things we can and should do to embrace our persons of color, sisters and brothers? Do you see blind spots among such congregations?
Invite them, right?
I think the answers are right here, right here. Go out from where you are, reach across lines of difference that have been turned into divisions. Don't trust the divisions, right? Mm-hmm.
So this is the power of diversity, equity, and inclusion. So Christian nationalism says, oh, everybody else is bad and we can't even be with them. So folks stay in their own little areas and don't get engaged with other folks that's not like them. But the key to really living out, I would call your faith, is to get out there among folks who you don't know, who folks that might make you feel uncomfortable, folks that you may not understand. So an example is this. So when the lady did the communion, folks never felt a person with a disability doing communion. Like, why is she there doing communion? She shouldn't be there. We don't need people who can't walk, who are able-bodied to do communion. Oh, that was a real argument, a real argument. Yes, exactly. Oh, I'm sorry. Thank you.
For people who didn't hear what the comment.
For women too, right? Yeah. So anyone that doesn't fit into what I would call a narrow understanding of humanity, they don't want them to participate. You can go down the list. My goodness. But the only way to break out of this thing called idolatry is by getting engaged with folks in the street, like Nell was saying, doing the call to actions, these kind of things, to get out of our bubble. I mean, Hell, it's the same thing in the black community. It's the same. It works the same way. Anytime we're not engaging with folks who are different than we are in diversity, we run the risk of being idolatry. I think we have an idea what idolatry might mean. Anyway, that's my story.
So we have two questions here that are very similar, addressing spiritual values. Martin Luther King Jr. belonged to the Southern Christian Leadership Conference. Historically and currently, how important are Christian values in the Poor People's Campaign? Which set of values, and how is that workable for people of all religions? And then the next question says, how might people behave if they know that there is no God, no afterlife, no seeing dead loved ones again? So what should they or we do now in this life that matters?
So I'm going to start, and I know Reverend Monica has something to add. So the campaign is it's the legacy, right? As we know, is in Southern Christian Leadership Conference. So there's the Christian, roots, and over my many years of trying to understand religion versus spirituality, I've come to the conclusion that religion is an organizing tool. And so the values that the person who's doing the organizing is influenced by reflect the kind of Christianity that it is, right? So Christian nationalists believe that they have been ordained by God to rule, to dominate, to extract, to control, to act in violent ways to get people to submit. So those are the values that we get from that kind of Christianity. The values of the Poor People Campaign are those of love, sustainability, inclusion, harmony, peace, justice, right? So those are the values that are reflected through this campaign by people who are Christian, by people who are Jewish, Muslim, Jain, Hindu, Baha'i, not undeclared, right? Right? So we come together across that line of difference without it having to function as a division among us. Thank you. I don't know if you have anything you want to add. Mm-hmm.
I'll just say one thing.
Mm-hmm.
If you remember in not the last administration, but the administration before that, right? We had those protests outside the White House, and Knucklehead turned a Bible upside down kind of thing. The folks who were out there, they were led by the Spirit. You had atheists out there as well as everybody else. Like, why? Because it wasn't about religion. It was about basic needs. It was about freedom and liberation. It was about democracy. I mean, unfortunately, in this country, religion is taking up so much space that sometimes the authenticity of who you are gets lost. But I would suggest go back to YouTube and look at those protests. When you look at the civil rights movement with Dr. King, you had imams out there and all kinds of folks. So the danger is when we don't engage in different kinds of faith. That's the danger. Anyway.
So I'm going to ask two questions here. We definitely see that marching to protest and lobbying Congress and doing letter campaigns are important. Recently at the National Cathedral, there was an Episcopal minister that implored the current administration to show mercy to people that have been oppressed or marginalized in the process. Is there a way to channel these motivations for a more just society into an effective national movement like Martin Luther King did? And the next question is there an action, a campaign locally in San Francisco with our new mayor that can help the campaign now?
Thank you so much for those questions. So here in San Francisco, actually, the Western Regional Advocacy Project is a locally based organization that works nationally on issues of homelessness and houselessness. And so I want to just say why I say both those words, because homelessness is something that I have experienced. For 7 years, I was homeless after Chase Bank stole my house, refused to modify the loan, even as Jamie Dimon was saying to Barack Obama, we're going to use this money. If you bail us out, we're going to use that money to keep homeowners in their homes. And I was faxing right then my loan modification papers to Chase over and over and over again. And they were losing it. They couldn't find it. There was for whatever reason. So I was homeless for 7 years following that, but I was never unhoused. The level of homelessness in this country, we don't really know, because how many people have their kids in their basement because they can't afford the rent? Their kids are homeless. If you can't make the rent to live where you choose, you're not houseless because your parents are covering you, or your auntie. That's what I did. I did couch surfing. I did pet sitting. I visited relatives who love me, but not for that long. Okay. You know what I'm saying? It's like, so had a lot of generosity and kindness bestowed upon me. But the numbers of people who are impacted by this runaway search for profit are, we don't really know those numbers. And so we have unhoused people, people who are literally living on the street. And we know those numbers are surging. So I said all that to say that the Western Regional Advocacy Project, they support poor people, homeless and unhoused, to organize in their own names and for their, and for the benefit of all of us. But to take direct action. And they have a campaign. They just on the 21st of January did an action with Mayor Daniel Laurie. Is that the new mayor's name? Right. And it was called #Cribs Not Concrete. Cribs Not Concrete. What kind of heart is inside of our leaders that we have to make it so plain that babies and toddlers are at the highest risk of eviction in this country? Anybody have to pay for childcare in this room recently? Right? It's like the rent. And so that campaign, Western Regional Advocacy Project, we work with them throughout the state to ping the campaign focuses on Congress, the State House, and the courts, because we're focused on policy. And so a lot of the folks we're supporting are pushing the mayors or pushing Alameda Fremont City Council, or the Alameda Board of Supervisors. And so we amplify those and connect them with other people in other communities throughout the state and then across the country to demand that the needs and concerns of, in 2018, by our count, it was 140 million poor people in the country. And we know that it's gotten worse since then. And so we want a moral agenda that centers the needs and concerns of those who are most impacted, because we rise together. That when we lift from the bottom, everybody rises. And we need and deserve no less than anybody else. The residue of a legal system that codified slavery by saying that Black people were not human beings, and so therefore did not don't worry about it. They're not human until the 3/5 compromise. And so a lot of people think Black people are 3/5 of a human being. Okay. Come on. It makes my head spin. But that residue is still here, so we're still getting treated like we're not fully human, overrepresented among unhoused people. So the Supreme Court says, sleep. What do they need sleep for? Arrest them. How dare they sleep outside? So I wish that this was a comedy routine, right? Because it's laughable. But the problem is the funerals, the tears, the distress, the medical problems, right? That are directly related to the value system that says the military budget can be 69% of the money that we spend on needs in this country, and that's okay.
Can you talk about constructive alternative programs such as regenerative community gardens? And are you building alliances towards a nationwide general strike to stop the coup by the current administration? A further questioner is asking, are you working with Open Door Legal in San Francisco that addresses housing and keeping people in their homes?
No, I'm not aware of Open Door Legal, but whoever suggested them, please, I want to talk to you after, because we're always looking for, people who have various kinds of resources to offer the struggles that are grassroots struggles. And so we don't have money for lawyers, and, there's a bunch of things we can't afford. But the suggestion about the gardening, that's the new world, right? That we're in this long and bitter but beautiful struggle to build. And we know that it's already in motion. In fact, the attacks that come at us are because we organize effectively and people are drawn to it because it resonates. So we draw heat from those who say they know that. I mean, even Donald Trump said, if everybody votes, we can't win. Right. So, I mean, I don't agree with him about much, but when he said that, I was like, exactly. So they attack us to undermine our ability to build this world. But we're here through the many, many, generations of ancestors who faced the same challenge of being misidentified as less than human and therefore easy to control and exploit. But our ancestors said, the story's not finished being written about that. So we're here to write the next chapter. And we invite all of you to take this talk and invite all of who you talk to investigate it with us.
We're going to ask two more questions here. In the San Francisco Bay Area, in my experience, most people that are willing to go to jail are white. Am I correct in thinking it is more dangerous to go to jail as a Black or brown person? And should people that are less threatened use their voice to stand up for the rights of others? And the next person writes, I visited yesterday and recommend the Black History Museum now as a permanent location in downtown Redwood City at 790 Jefferson Avenue, which has excellent exhibits and education.
Right now, that's another one I have to write down. I didn't know there was a Black History Museum there. Okay. Please.
I'm going to address the going to jail part. Growing up in America, I know Black history, and I know how law enforcement can treat people like me. I don't put myself like that, put myself in a position to go to jail. It's got to be really something that's going to be spirit-led. Not like you walk in fear, but you make sure that what you do is actually going to lead to something that's much more liberating. I studied Malcolm X and other leaders, including Dr. King, who went to jail, but it was spirit led versus and when you're in, and let me be clear about this. Over here, yes, it's white folk with white privilege who can go to jail because hey, you're white, you're like us, versus a black person or a brown person going to jail. The question becomes, how do you use your privilege to make things better for folks who have no privilege? I think one of the key things, part of healing, is to acknowledge that, yes, we do have privilege. The question is, how do we use that privilege? In my experience of the UU, because I did go to Stark King for my Master in Social Change, which is a really good school I highly recommend. But how do you use that privilege in such a way that you can make change? Yeah, as Stark King would say. Thank you.
Before we bring up Jeff to do a wrap up, we definitely want to thank Reverend Monica Cross and Nell Myhand for the great presentation today on behalf of the Poor People's Campaign. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you so much. Relating to the last question, I'm just going to repeat a few announcements from the beginning when we had fewer people in the room. Our forum 3 weeks from today, on February 23rd, we'll have Dorsey Nunn, who's going to be speaking about the civil rights of incarcerated and formerly incarcerated people. So that kind of relates to the last question we took. Please come back for that talk. A week from today, we will have our own church member, Wayne Shung, speaking about animal rights, and his talk is titled How Violations of Animal Rights Fuels the MAGA Movement. So that's kind of an interesting title for a talk. Please hope you'll come back for that. And after church next Sunday, we have Sensible Cinema presenting a film called Small is Beautiful. And I'm just going to try to quickly read this description. It's a documentary that delves into a contentious proposal surrounding the Sonoma Development Center, a state-owned property situated in the rural area encompassing the town of Eldridge and Glen Ellen. And I think it's a small home kind of concept as a way of trying to address unhoused folks. We don't have a forum 2 weeks from today. There won't be a meeting on that day. That's, I think, the 19th. So we have 2 more forums this month. After church today, please come back to this room at 12:30. There will be a meeting, a congregational vote, and you'll be voting on a resolution that our committee, the Human Rights Working Group, has written called the Apartheid-Free Communities Pledge, and we hope that you'll vote for it. You'll be having more information about it at that time. And I believe that's all the announcements we have. So thank you very much, Dr. Monica Cross and Nell Myhand, for presenting today. Thank you.